Code Explained says hi. Today we're going to learn about all the 33 array methods in JavaScript. Well, do you really need to learn about all these methods? The answer is yes, because sometimes when you're trying to code some logic and get your goal at the end, instead of using the right array method that will get you directly to the goal, you're going to use some old method that you know, and that will make it a very long way to get to your goal, and that will make you write more lines of code, so your code will be very long and less readable. So for example, instead of using the map method to get directly to your goal because you don't know the map exists, you're using a forEach method. So I think it's really important to know about all the methods, all the array methods out there, so you can use the right array method all the time. And now, because most of the times our array methods will take in as a parameter a callback function, I'm going to use all the time an arrow function. So let's talk about what is an arrow function. So in a traditional way, if you want to declare a function, you would use the function keyword, and then your function name, and then the parentheses, and then some curly braces. Then here it goes your parameters and then some code, and if your function happens to return a value, you would use a return statement, for example something plus a parameter. Now if you want to do the same with an arrow function, you would go and say const function. It's like when you are declaring a constant in JavaScript, equals, you're going to need the parentheses, this is where you're going to put your parameters, and there you need the arrow, hence the arrow function. Now we have here again our curly braces, so this is where our code will go, and this is where our return statement will go. So this function is exactly like this one with some limitations. Now if your arrow function happens to not have any logic going on before your return statement, for example if we don't have any code here, in that case you can just go and remove the return keyword and the curly braces. So in that case your arrow function will look like this. So const function equals parameter, your arrow, and then something plus parameter without the curly braces and the return keyword. And now for most of the methods, to cover them, I'm going to use an array called food, which has some fruits and some vegetables. Well, without further ado, let's go and talk about the first method, which is the famous forEach. For its syntax is simple, you're just going to say array.forEach, and then it takes in a callback function. For the callback function, the first parameter will always be the elements in your array, and then you can run some code here. So when do you need to use a forEach method? You want to use a forEach method when you want to execute the same code on all the elements of an array. Now let's go and see an example. This is our food array. If I say food.forEach, this is the callback. So the first parameter will always be element. I can call it item. I can call it anything actually. So the first parameter here will always represent the elements in our array. Now let's say I want to console log this item. So this code here will get executed on all of these elements here using the forEach method. So on the first iteration, the item here will be the apple, console.log the apple. So in my console, I will get an apple. The second iteration, the third, and etc. And that's it for the each method. And the next method is going to be the map method. So for the syntax, it's going to be the same, almost the same. So the map takes in a callback function, and again the first parameter is the element, so the element of our array. Now for the map, the only difference is the callback function here needs to return the new element, because the map doesn't act on the original array, doesn't change the original array, but instead it returns a new array that is populated with new elements. Let's see an example. So for example, let's say food.map, and this is our callback here. I'm going to call this first parameter item that represents our elements here. Now I'm going to return, each time I'm going to return a banana. And now because map doesn't change the original array, instead it returns a new array, I'm going to save that new array into a constant called bananas. And now let's take a look on the elements of our array bananas. So on the first iteration, map will go and run this callback function on the first element, which is an apple. So the item here is an apple, but I'm returning a banana. So the first element here, the new array returned by map, will be a banana. Then on the second iteration, it's a carrot, but I'm gonna return again a banana. So the second element here will be a banana. For the third one, the same thing. So my bananas array, or the new array returned by map, will be populated with just bananas. And you can see that our bananas array here has the same length as our food array. So food has 8 elements. Also bananas has 8 elements. Now let's see one more example. Let's say here food, then map, and now I'm gonna call this any. Now any is the first parameter of our callback function, then it will represent the element, the same as the item here. And then I'm going to return any plus any. And because map will return a new array, I'm going to assign that to a constant called duplicate food. And duplicate food will be an array. Now for the elements of the array, now on the first iteration here, map will run this function on the first element here, which is the apple. So any is apple. Well, this will return any plus any means apple plus apple. So the first element will be apple plus apple. Now on the second iteration, any is going to be the carrot. So it will return carrot plus carrot. So I will get here carrot plus carrot for the second element of our duplicate food array, and so on. And that's how the map method works. Now let's go and talk about filter. So for the syntax, it's almost the same as the map method, but here again the first parameter is the element. You could run any code you want, but you, instead of returning a new element, you need to return a condition, and you must return a condition. So based on this condition here, our filter method will filter out all the elements in our array. Again, filter will not change the array, the original array. Instead, we'll create a new array populated with all the filtered elements. Now let's see an example. If I say food.filter, our filter here takes in a callback function. The first parameter is going to be the item. Now I'm going to return a condition because I'm not going to use any code here. I'm not going to use the curly braces or the return. I'm just going to return a condition right away. So I'm going to say if the item.type is equal to fruit. So if this condition here evaluates to true, the item will be filtered and put in our array fruits. If the item.type doesn't equal fruit, means that this evaluates to false, this item here will not be filtered out and put in our array fruits. So if we take a look at our fruits array, at the first iteration, the item is going to be an apple. The item.type is going to be equal to fruit, which evaluates to true, so the item will be filtered. So I'm going to see the apple in my array fruits. For the second one is a carrot. The item.type doesn't equal to fruit, so this will evaluate to false, so carrot will not be filtered, so I'm not going to see the carrot in my array. And then I'm going to go to the next one. The item.type is actually a fruit, so this will evaluate to true, and I'm going to see this item in my array. And then this is not a fruit, so I'm going to go to the next one. This is a fruit, and this is not a fruit, this is not a fruit, and this is a fruit. Right, now let's see another example. Let's say food filter item, and then item.type doesn't equal to fruit. So in this case here, I'm going to call the array vegetables. So let's go to the first element here. So it's an apple. Apple.type doesn't equal to fruit. This will evaluate to false because this is actually fruit. So I'm not going to see this item in my array vegetables. So I'm going to go to the next one, carrot. So the carrot.type doesn't equal to fruit, which is true. So I'm going to see the carrot in my array here, and so on. That's it for the filter method. Let's move on to the next one, which is concat. So this method here is used to concatenate two arrays, to merge two arrays. But it's not used for just arrays. You can actually concatenate an array with a value. And also you can concatenate arrays with a value and also another array. And of course, you can concatenate an array with more than just one array or two arrays or more than a value. Well, concatenate doesn't change the original arrays. Instead, it creates a new one. For example, here if I say fruits.concat with vegetables, concatenate will merge these two arrays here and create a new array out of them. So I'm going to assign that new array to a constant called food. If we take a look on the food, we would find the elements from fruits and then the ones from vegetables. That's it for concat. Let's move on to the next one. And the next one is find. The find method here is used to find an element inside an array. Find is almost like filter. Now, the find here takes in a callback function, and that callback function takes in as a first parameter the element again. And then you can do any logic you want here, but at the end you need to return a condition. And when this condition here is satisfied, find will return the right element. Now let's go and see an example. So I'm going to say food.find, and then this item here, the first parameter, will represent our element here. Now I'm going to return the condition right away. So I'm going to find the element based on its color. So if I say here item.color equals to yellow, the find method here will go through the food array here, and when the item.color equals yellow condition is satisfied, it will return that item. So for example, if it goes for the first one, the item.color doesn't equal to yellow, so it's not satisfied, so find will not return apple. Now this condition here is only satisfied when the element is the banana. So I'm going to assign this to a constant called banana, and if we take a look on the banana constant, it's going to be this element here. Now let's see another example, and let's say this time that these are values like numbers or strings. So if I use find, then my callback here, item, and then I'm going to return a condition which is item equals to a watermelon. In this case here, this condition here will never be satisfied. So if I assign this to a constant called watermelon, in this case watermelon will be undefined. So if the condition is satisfied, find will return the element, and if the condition is not satisfied, find will return undefined. And now let's move on to the next method, which is findIndex. So findIndex is almost identical to find, except it returns index instead of the element. So it's also taking a callback function and then return a condition at the end. When the condition is satisfied, instead of returning the element like findIndex will return the index of that element. So simple. So let's see an example. So here I'm going to use the same condition as before, and now I'm going to assign this to a constant called banana index because this time it's an index. So if I take a look on the banana index, it's going to be 4. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. The index of the banana, of the item that has a color yellow, is 4. Now if we go and look for a watermelon, in this case watermelon index will be -1 because this condition here is not satisfied. So if the condition is satisfied, it will return the index of the element. If it's not satisfied, it will return -1. And that's it for the findIndex. Let's move on to indexOf. FindIndex and indexOf are almost the same method. The only difference here is that indexOf takes in the element itself, the element you want to search its index in the array, and findIndex takes in a callback function which lets you use a more complex code to search for the index of the element. Now here for the indexOf also takes in a second parameter which is startIndex. I'm going to talk about it in a minute. Now let's see an example here. Food.indexOf of the banana. If I assign this to a banana index constant, then I will get 4. So indexOf here will return the index of the first element it finds in the array. Now for example, if I set start index to 5, so indexOf will start from 5, then I will get the index of this banana here, and banana index will be then 6, not 4. Now let's see an example of indexOf when the item doesn't exist in our array. So in that case, the indexOf returns -1, just like a findIndex method. Now, when do you need to use findIndex and when do you need to use indexOf? You need to use findIndex when you are searching for a non-primitive types inside your array, for example like objects, but you will use indexOf when you are searching for a primitive types in an array, for example booleans or numbers or strings. Well, that's it for indexOf. Let's move on to its sister lastIndexOf. So it's simple. lastIndexOf will take in the same parameters as indexOf, except lastIndexOf will start from the end of the array. So if I use the same examples as I used for indexOf, if I search for banana here, I will get 6 this time, not 4, because now lastIndexOf will start searching for the index of the element from the end of the array. Again, if I go and search for the last index of an element that doesn't exist in our array, I will get -1. And that's it for lastIndexOf. Now let's move on to the next one, which is sum. Well, sum method here is used when you want to check if at least one of your elements in an array satisfies a condition. So the syntax for sum is like this. So sum takes in a callback function. The first parameter again is the element. Then you can do any code you want, any logic, and then you need to return a condition. Now sum will go through your array here and checks whether at least one element of these elements here returns true for this condition here. So let's see an example. Let's say food.sum, then item, if the item equals a banana. So sum will go through your array and finds if at least one of these elements is a banana. I'm going to assign this to has a banana, then has a banana will be true. Now something I want to mention, sum will go and run this function on each of these elements here. Once it finds that element that satisfies this condition here, sum will exit or will stop running this function on the other elements in the array. And now let's see another example. Let's say food sum item, where the item equals a watermelon. In this case here, none of these elements here will satisfy this condition here, so we're gonna get false. So sum returns true if at least one of the elements in an array returns or satisfies the condition, and false if none of the elements satisfies the condition. And now that's it for the sum method. Let's move on to its sister that does the opposite, which is every. Now when sum go and check whether at least one of these elements or at least one of the elements of an array returns true for this condition, now every will go and check if all the elements in an array returns true for this condition here. So if I, for example, say food that every item in the array is a banana, this will return false because all the elements here doesn't satisfy this condition here. Only one satisfies that condition. When all the elements satisfies this condition here, then every will return true. And now let's move on to includes. So includes here is almost the same as the sum method, except the includes here takes in the element itself, but sum takes in a callback function. Now you can also search for the element from an index given as the second parameter to the method includes. Includes returns true or false, so whether the array includes the search element or not. So let's see an example. So I'm going to say food that includes a potato. I'm going to assign the value to has potato. Has potato now will be true because our array here includes a potato. Now if I say food that includes an onion, in this case our food here array doesn't include an onion, so has onion here will be false. And that's it for the includes method. So let's move on to the next method, which is push. Now push is used whenever you want to add an element to the end of an array. So push here modifies the original array. Now if I go and say food.push onion, push here will add onion to the end of our array food. And if I assign this to a constant called newLength, now push will push or add this element to food array, so change this array here, and also it will return its new length after adding that element. So it was 8 for the length, now it's going to be 9. Now let's move on to its sister unshift, which does almost the same job, except unshift here will add the element to the start of the array. So if I go and say food.unshift onion, this time the onion will be added to the start of the food array. The same thing here, the unshift method will return the new length of the array after adding that element. So here it's going to be 9 again. And now let's move on to the next one, which is pop. Now pop is used whenever you want to remove an element from the end of an array. So pop changes the original array. So if I say here food.pop, this will remove the last element here of our array food. If I assign this to a constant called removed item, now pop will return the removed item, which is the avocado. So pop removes the last element and returns it. Now let's go to its sister, shift. Shift does the same thing, except it removes the first element of an array. So in this case here, shift will go and remove this apple here, this first element. So this is what we get for the food array. And then if I assign this to a constant called removed item, the removed item here will be apple. So shift removes the first element of an array and returns it. That's it for the shift method. And now let's move on to the next one, which is toString. So toString is used whenever you want to convert an array to a string. So toString here doesn't take in any parameters, and toString doesn't change the original array. So if I say here food.toString and assign this to a constant called foodString, now the foodString here will be a string with all the elements of the array inside and separated with commas. Well, if you want to convert an array to a string, but you're not comfortable with these commas here, then you need to use join. So join basically is the same as the toString. It takes an array and converts it to a string, except this time you can choose the separator yourself. Well, if we go and use join here on our food array without using a separator and then assign this to a food string constant, I will get the same results we got using the toString method. Now let's see an example where I use a separator. The separator must be a string, so I'm using here a comma, then a space here. So the food string now will be a string with all the elements separated with a comma and a space. Now let's go and see another example here. For the separator here, I'm going to choose a space, then a plus sign, then a space here. So food string here will be a string with all elements separated with space, then a plus sign, then a space again. Now let's go and see the last example here where I use a separator as an empty string. In that case, all the elements here will be joined with no separator in between. And that's it for the join method. And now let's move on to the next method, which is fill. So fill here is used to fill an array with an element you specify as the first parameter. Fill changes the original array. So let's see an example here. So if I say food.fill with banana, this will fill the whole array with bananas. Also, you can specify the second parameter, which will be the start index from where you want to fill your array. For example, if I say here food.fill with bananas from index 2, so this will go and start from index 2. So we'll still have the apple and the carrot here, and then from index 2 here, it will start filling the array with bananas. Now you can also specify the end index as a third parameter here. So here, for example, if I say food.fill with bananas starting from index 2 and end at 6, well, 6 here is not included. So the food array here will now be starting from index 2 here, and it will end at 6, but 6 here is not included. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'm gonna still have my potato in the array as well as the avocado. So what's in between now is gonna be filled with bananas. And that's it for the fill method. Now let's move on to the next method, which is copyWithin. So you will use copyWithin whenever you want to copy some elements in your array to a different position inside the same array. So for example, I want to copy these two elements here to the end of the array. So copyWithin takes in as the first parameter that position, the position where you want to copy your elements. It's called target index. And the copyWithin here will modify your original array. So if I say food.copyWithin 2, this means that I want to copy the elements into the position 2. So the position 0 and 1 will not be changed. The index or the element with the index 0 and 1 will not be changed. Now what's going to be copied in this position here is the elements of the array starting from 0 till the end of the array. But because I only have here 6 elements left, this will copy only these first 6 elements here into this position here. And that's because the copyWithin doesn't change the array length, or it doesn't add new elements to the array. Now let's see an example where you can actually go and choose or specify from where you want to start copying. So to specify that, you want to specify a second parameter called startIndex. So if I say here copy within 2, then 4, so this means I want to copy the elements into the position 2 and start copying from the position 4 or the index 4. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I want to start copying from the banana till the end. So this means I want to copy these 4 elements into this position here. But because I copied only 4 elements into this position, the last 2 elements will not be changed. So I will still have these 2 last elements into their position. Now you can also specify the end index. So you can specify the start index from where you want to start the copy and its end. So let's see an example. So copy within 2, then 4, and let's say 6. But 6 here is not included. So I'm going to copy the elements into the position 2, and the copy starts from 4. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So the banana again, and then 5 and 6. 6 is not included. So the elements that I'm going to copy are just these 2 here, the banana and the tomato. So this will be copied into position 2. And the last 4 elements here will not be changed, so I will still have the banana, tomato, potato, and the avocado. And that's it for the copy within method. And now let's move on to the next method, which is slice. So this method here is used whenever you want to take a slice of your array. So the syntax is like this. So slice takes in 2 parameters, the start index from where you want to start the slice and the end index of it. And slice here doesn't modify the original array. So let's see an example here. So I'm going to say foo.slice. I'm going to give it the start index 2 and the end index 4. Keep in mind that the end index is not included. So I'm going to assign this to a constant called food_slice because slice doesn't change the original array. So if I take a look on the food_slice now, so the slice that I will get now will start from 2, so 0, 1, 2. And then it will end at 4, so 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 not included. So this is the slice that I will get using this code here. And now if you specify just the start index without the end index by default will be the length of the array. So if I say, for example, food.slice2 and then assign this to food_slice constant, this will return the slice starting from 2 till the end of the array. And if you don't specify both start index and end index, then by default the start index will be 0 and index will be the length of the array. So if I say food.slice without start index and end index, then the food_slice will be the whole array. So it's like taking a slice from the 0 index and the length of the array. Well, that's it for slice. Now let's move on to the next one, which is splice. Now splice is used to insert or to replace or to remove an element or elements from an array. So for this example, I'm going to use this array months, and the syntax here for the splice is array.splice, and then the first parameter it takes in is an index that we call start. So this is like where you want to start removing or adding or replacing your elements. Now splice here changes the original array, and at the same time it returns a value, which is an array that has all the elements that has been removed. So let's see an example. So months.splice, and I'm going to use 0 as the start index here. So what will happen here is that our splice will go to the index 0, and because I didn't specify what are the elements that I want to remove or what I want to add into the array, no changes will be applied to our array months, so we will just get our months unchanged. And now this code here will return an array. And now if you assign this to a constant, you will get an array which is empty because we didn't remove any element. Now if you want to remove an element, you need to specify the second parameter. So the first one is start, then the second one is the delete count, or how many elements you want to remove from the start. So let's go and say months, that's splice 0 and 1. So this tells splice to go to the index 0 and then remove 1 from there. So if I go to my months array here, this is our index 0, and I want to remove one element, so this means that I will just remove John and keep all the other 3 elements. So if I take a look on months after this code here, I will get this array here with just February, March, and April. And remember that this code here will return an array with the elements removed from the array months. Now if you want to add elements to an array, you need to specify the third parameter. So I'm going to say array.splice start and delete count, and then the item or the element you want to add into the array. So let's see an example here. So I'm going to go and say months.splice. I want to go to 0 index, and then I want to delete one element, and then I want to go and add January into this position here. So what this code will do is it will go and remove the first element, because we go to start here, which is 0, and we remove one element. And then this code here will return an array with John inside. And because I specified here one element, then one element is going to be added into that position here. So I'm going to get here January. And that's how Splice works. Now you can also add more than one element by specifying the items you want to add after the delete count. So after delete count, item 1, item 2 till item n will all be added into the position you set here as the start index. And that's it for the splice. Let's move on to the next method, which is sort. So now if you want to sort an array, you will use the sort method. So sort here will change the original array, so you don't need to assign this to another variable. You just need to say array.sort and the original array will be sorted. So let's see an example here. I have an array of months with strings. All the elements are strings. So if I use months.sort, this will sort this in ascending order by default. And now if I use sort on our array numbers, this is what I will get. So 1, then 5, 6. You think it's going to be 9, it's going to be 80. Why? Because sort by default will convert all the elements here into strings and then compare these strings in UTF-16 code units order. So 80 comes before 9. Well, to fix this, you need to use a compare function, a function that you need to pass as argument to the sort method here. So let's talk about the function here. The function takes in as parameters a and b, where a is the first element for comparison and b is the second. So for example here, a is going to be 1 and then b is going to be 5, etc. And then here some calculations determine whether a comes before b or b comes before a. So in general, you need to return a value, and based on the value, for example, if it's 0 or less than 0 or equal to 0. So if it's greater than 0, then sort will put a after b. If it's less than 0, so a before b. And if it's 0, then it's going to keep the original order of a and b. So for our numbers here, if we pass in a compare function, so if we say a, b, and here I'm going to return a value, and it's going to be a minus b. So in this case here, when we go to our numbers array, let's say here for the first two numbers 1 and 5, so here a is 1 and b is 5. So in this case here, a minus b means 1 minus 5, which is minus 4. So here we are in this case here, so it's less than 0. So this will sort a before b, so it means that I will have 1 and then 5. Now for 80, for example, and 9, so if a is 80 and b is 9, so a minus b, 80 minus 9 is 71, which is greater than 0. So here it will sort a after b. So a after b, so 9, then b. And this is how you can sort your numbers in the ascending order. If you want to, for example, sort your numbers in a descending order, you need to say b minus a. And this is a basic use of the sort method. Now let's move on to the next one, which is reverse. So reverse is used whenever you want to reverse an array. Reverse will go and changes your original array. It takes in no parameters. Now, if I have here an array of numbers, so from 1 to 5, the elements or the numbers. Now, if I use reverse on my numbers array, the numbers array now will be reversed, or the element will be transposed. So now I have 5, 4, 3, 2, then 1. And that's it for the reverse method. Let's move on to the next one, which is from. So from here is used whenever you want to convert an array like to an array. Be careful, this is the array object, not an array you create using const or let. Now an array like, for example, an array like object or a string. Let's see an example here. So I have a string here of numbers 1, 2, 3, 4. I can just go and use array.from. Again, this is the array object from, and then I'm going to pass to it the string, and then I'm going to assign this to numbers. Now numbers is going to be an array. Now if I take a look on the numbers array, is going to be an array of strings. Now if I want to get an array from this string but still have these as numbers, I can manipulate that using the second parameter for our method from, which is the map function. So you can pass in the array like, just like here, and then for the second parameter you can use a map function. The map function here takes in as the first parameter the element, so these elements here, and then you can do some logic here, and at the end you need to return a value. Now let's see an example. So I'm going to say array.from with string. If I don't use a map function, I'm going to get this result here. Now I'm going to use a map function. Now remember, the first parameter is the element. Now all I'm going to do is I'm going to convert this element each time to a number. So I'm going to use this number object here. So this will convert this element here into a number. So now if I take a look on my numbers array, it's going to be an array, but this time the elements are numbers, not strings. And that's it for the from method. Let's move on to the next one, which is isArray. So isArray is used to check whether a value is an array or not. Again, this is the array object, not your array. So let's say here we have an array food, and if I want to check if this is an array or not, I'm going to say the array object, then isArray method, and then I'm going to pass in my array food here, and then this will return true because this is actually an array. Now if I have, for example, a string foobar, in this case this is not an array, so this will return false. For example, let's say we have an object. If I pass this to my method isArray, this will return again false. Again, if I have here undefined, then isArray will return false. So the isArray method here will only return true when it's actually an array. And now let's move on to the next method, which is valueOf. So the valueOf here takes in no parameter, and it returns the array itself without any changes. So if I have this array here and I say food.valueOf and I assign this to a constant food copy, the food copy will be the same array as food here. So no changes have been made to the original array food here. Now let's move on to the next method, which is entries. Entries here is use an array to get its entries. Entries doesn't take in any parameters, and it doesn't change the original array. Instead, it returns a new array iterator object that contains the key value pairs for each index in an array. So for example, if I use the entries method on our food array here and then assign this to a const food entries. Now I need to loop over my food entries to see the entries. In that case, I'm not going to use an ordinary for loop or a forEach method. I'm going to use a forOf statement. So for each element of our food entries here, array iterator, I'm going to console log that element. So simply here, the elements of our food entries array iterator will be an array with the key value pairs. So this one for the second element, the third and the fourth element. You can also get these elements here of our food entries by spread our food entries using the spread operator. In this case, you will get an array with all of these elements here inside. That's it for the entries method. Now let's move on to the keys method. Now for the keys method, it's almost the same as the entries, except this only returns the keys of an array. So array.keys doesn't change the original array, it takes in no parameters, and it returns again a new array iterator object. Now if I have my food array here and then use the keys or call the keys method on food and assign that to a const food keys, now to loop over it I need to use again a forOf method. So for every key or for each key of food keys I'm going to console log the key. So the key for this one is 0, so I'm going to get 0, 1, 2, 3. Now I can also spread the food keys const here or array iterator, and they will get an array with all the keys inside. And that's it for the keys. Let's move on to the next one, which is values. Again, the values is almost the same as entries and keys, except it only returns an array or iterator object that contains only the values. So if I have food here and call values on food, assign that to a const food values, I can now use a forOf to loop over those values. So let value of food values, if I console log the value, I will get each of the values of my array food. I can also spread the food values array iterator, and I will get an array with all the values inside. And that's it. Let's move on to the next method. And the next one here is reduce. So the reduce method here is used whenever you want to reduce your array's elements into one single value at the end. So for example, I want to calculate the sum of these numbers here. So array.reduce takes in two parameters, the callback function and an initial value. The initial value here is optional, and the callback function is called a reducer. Now for the reducer or the callback function takes in as parameters the previous value and the current value. For example here, the previous value is going to be 1, the first element, and then the current value is going to be 2. Now at the end here, for your reducer, you must return a value. Now let's go and see an example here. Let's go and calculate these numbers here sum using the reduce method. So I'm going to go and define a reducer function that I'm going to pass to my reduce method here. And then here is the previous value and the current value parameters. Now to calculate the sum, I'm just going to go and add the previous value to the current value each time. Then I'm going to create a const called sum, and then I'm going to call reduce on my numbers array here. So I'm going to pass the reducer function here to my reduce method, and then an initial value here, which is optional, but we're going to see an example where I pass an initial value, and in the next example we're going to see when I don't pass an initial value to the reduce method. Now let's go and see what's going to happen on each iteration here. So I'm going to call this column here callback iteration. So on the first call, the previous value will be the initial value here. And then the current value will be the first element in our array numbers. So it's like numbers with index 0. So here on the first call, the reducer will be called with these two values, and it will return 0 plus 1, which is 1. So then on the second call, the previous value will be 1. Now the returned value from the reducer on the first iteration or the first call. Now the current value on the second call will be the second element here, which is 2. And then we will call the reducer, and the reducer will return 1 plus 2, which is 3. So the third call previous value will be 3. The current value will be 3. And on the fourth call, previous value will be what the reducer returns from here, which is 3 plus 3. So it's going to be 6. And then the current value will be the last one here, which is 4. Now, because we don't have any other element in the array, this is the last iteration, or this is the last call. And on the fourth call, the reducer will return the previous value plus the current value, which is 6 plus 4, so it's going to be 10. So now the sum here of the numbers in our array numbers will be 10. Now let's see an example where I don't use an initial value. So numbers that reduce, I'm just going to pass the reducer without the initial value. So for the iterations here, the callback iteration on the first call, now because we don't have any initial value here, the previous value will be 1, the first element in our array, and the current value will be 2, the second element in our array. And then on the second call, the previous value will be the returned value from the reducer, which is 1 plus 2, so 3. The current value then will be 3, and then on the third call, the previous value will be 3 plus 3, which is 6, and the current value will be now 4. And again, because we don't have any elements left, on the third call, the reducer will return 10, 6 plus 4, so the sum will be 10. So now we have seen how the reduce method works without or with an initial value. So let's go and move on to the next method, which is reduceRight. So reduceRight is almost the same as the reduce, except instead of starting from left to right, reduceRight starts from right to left. So it starts from the end of the array. And then the reduceRight takes in the same parameters as the reduce, a callback function and initial value. Now let's do the same example we did with the reduce method. So I'm going to define a reducer here. So we're going to calculate the sum of these numbers again. So I'm going to assign numbers.reduceRight. I'm going to pass in reducer, then the initial value 0 to a constant called sum. And then for the iterations here, on the first call, the previous value will be now initial value because I have passed an initial value. Then for the current value now it's going to be 4 because reduceRight will start from the end here. Then on the second call, the previous value will be the returned value from the reducer, which is 0 plus 4, so 4. And then the current value will be 3 because we're moving to left. Then on the third call, the previous value will be 7. 4 plus 3, the returned value from the reducer. And now the current value will be 2. So moving to the left. Then on the fourth call, the previous value will be 9, 7 plus 2, and the current value will be 1. And now because this is the last iteration, the returned value from this code here, from calling reduceRight on our numbers, will be 9 plus 1, which is 10. So the sum of the numbers is 10. And that's it for the reduceRight. Let's move on to the next one, which is flat. So flat is used to flatten an array. For example, let's say you have numbers, an array, which has some values here, some single values, but the fourth element here is another array. And then this array here itself has some nested arrays. Well, this is a multi-dimensional array. And when you want to flatten an array, that means you want to get, for example, a one-dimensional array. Or you have a 3-dimensional array, but you want to get a 2-dimensional array. So you need to use the array.flat method that takes in as a parameter the depth. So here, if you use flat or if you call flat on an array without any depth, in that case the depth is set to 1. Remember, flat doesn't change the original array, instead it returns a new array flattened. Now, numbers.flat will flatten our array numbers with a depth set to 1. So which means our array will look like this at the end. So by calling flat with the default depth, which is 1 here, get rid of one dimension. Now if I call flat with 2 for the depth, then this will get rid of 2 dimensions. So the first one here, which we get rid of it in this example, and then the second dimension. And now if we call flat with the depth of 3, this will get rid of the last dimension and we will get a one-dimensional array out of these array here numbers. Now if you keep calling flat with incrementing the depth, for example let's say 4, this won't get you anywhere. You will just get a one-dimensional array at the end, and that's it. And now that you know flat, now let's move on to the last method in our tutorial, which is flatMap. So when you call flatMap on an array, it's basically like calling a map method, then a flat method right away. So when you call a map with a callback function on an array, then flat is exactly the same thing as calling flatMap on an array with the same callback. Now let's go and see an example, although I think this is enough for you to understand what flatMap does and how it works. Now if I have a food array here, which is a 2-dimensional array, so we have 2 elements, both are arrays with 2 elements inside. Now if I call map on food and then assign the returned array to a const called result. So now result is an array, and therefore my callback function, it takes in this first parameter as the element. Because this is an array, I'm just going to call this array. Now for the first element array, now on each iteration for this array here, this whole array that has 2 elements, I'm going to return an array which has the first element plus the second element. Alright, now if I take a look on the result array, it's going to be an array with 2 elements. Both are arrays because I'm returning array here. And inside I have only one element, which is the first element here plus the second element. And that's it. Now if I call flat directly after the map method, this will flatten our array and this will make it a one-dimensional array. And now if I go and use the flatMap method and pass in the exact same callback function, this will return the same result. So you either use map within flat or use flatMap, but flatMap is more efficient. Well, that's it for this tutorial. I hope you liked it. I hope you learned new things. Don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and share the video.